who should facilitate interviews and focus groups of this type?
So it really depends on what the goal is.
Mm-hmm.
Focus groups, like, it's not uncommon. There are companies that do it if there's a new product that they're looking to go to market with, and they want somebody who's a professional facilitator. They've got their list of questions and they go in and they, elicit answers. That's one type of focus group you can have. Another type of focus group, which is a little bit different, can be, let's say, a group of your top 20% customers, where you really want to learn what the difference is between them and some of your other customers who might be in the same segment. So with that, you wouldn't want an external company coming in because the relationship's already been developed. That would be a great time to have somebody. And again, it really depends on the situation, right? So it's kind of a really hard question to answer, because you want someone senior enough, but not so senior that, let's say, the relationship isn't there to be able to go into those feeling questions, right? So with focus groups, I would say that interviews can be the same. In some cases, you don't want the company involved at all, particularly if it's been a very negative experience. Yeah. Best to have somebody who's not attached to the company, because the person or the customer being interviewed then can feel, perhaps they can, tell you what they're really thinking.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And then other times, Rick, even with customer interviews, you sometimes want it to be where the relationship is established, so that you can get down into some of those other feelings and also better understanding. So exit interviews are actually best done not with an external company, depending again on the relationship. If it's very negative experience, then you might want someone who's external. But if let's just say the situation isn't, I hate you, can't wait to get away from you kind, then you can have somebody from within the company.
Or even, I'm thinking here, because there could be two reasons for I hate you. Okay. Like, it could be I hate you.
Yes.
Actually, the problem is your product's great. It's you. If someone else was my salesperson, account manager, CSM, I wouldn't have a problem. It's you I hate. You're not the right person to do the. No. On the other hand, if it's the other way around, when I say I hate you, I don't hate you. It's your product I hate. I think you've been great. Well, then, fine to do an exit interview, because you've got the trust relationship. So, so I think what I'm coming to on this, and what I was trying to explore with this, is what I would say is that actually, superficially, it would look easy to do this, to go through this process, but actually there's a lot of detail where you do need some expertise here to make the most of it. Now, it's not to say you couldn't do it, just do it, oneself, without the expense of bringing somebody in, such as yourself, experts in. But the point is of bringing an expert in is both deciding, like, when to do qualitative, when to do quantitative, but deciding if you're going to go down the qualitative route, whether it's going to be interview or focus group or a combination, on deciding then who you're going to invite, who you're going to have as the facilitator, what the questions are going to be, in what order those questions are going to be, and how much time you're going to devote to each of them, how the data is going to be recorded, how the data is going to be analyzed, how you market and communicate and evangelize all of this to the customer to get their agreement to show up. There's more to this than you might think at first glance, right?
Absolutely. And the other part, that there's also data cleaning, which, people are like, well, what is data cleaning? As soon as you transcribe these calls, what you want to do, because you can't furiously be writing notes and listening and continuing to, because you want to give your focus, right, either in the focus group or in an interview. You want to, again, it's about trust. Humans want to know that so if I'm constantly looking down or typing, our brains instantly go, hey, are they really listening to me?
Yeah.
Like, we know it because we feel it, right? As soon as someone checks their phone when they're talking to, oh yeah, I'm listening to you. And you think, no, you're not, you're already distracted.
Yeah.
It's all of these things. And then it's also stacking. Like you said, it's not just the quantitative data, but how does your survey data tie in with what you're hearing with your focus groups and your interviews? What do you do when your survey data says something vastly different than what you're discovering, right? Because it happens. You're like, oh, we think everything's great. We interview and we discover like, whoa, we were so far off the mark. What do you do with that? And who's responsible? And that, I think, is the biggest key to all of this. You can have everything else up to that point. Who's responsible now for taking all this information and making sure change happens?
Right. Okay. So I think this has been great. And I think this has been a great conversation around like the process of understanding churn. I'd now like to turn our attention a little bit to like one of the particular issues or challenges that we might come across. Okay, so let me ask you this. Let me bring up the topic of involuntary churn. What is involuntary churn, and how would you recommend CS teams try to reduce involuntary churn?
Okay. So involuntary churn, I've also heard it called delinquent churn. It is simply when credit card payments fail.
Okay.
So and it can be like, there's tons of reasons why, from an expired card to there's a change in process, whatever it might be, right? So if you're working with purchase orders, they've changed their system. Now you're not being paid. So that's where the churn is involuntary. It assumes
it's unintentional.
What's that?
So it's unintentional from the perspective of the customer.
Right. And what it assumes is that the customer wants to stay, but they involuntarily left because of some process issue.
Or if I could put it slightly more negative than that, didn't decide to leave.
Right. They didn't decide to leave. Although,
I'll be honest with you, in my own situation, I know of times when, if I could be bothered, I might have left by now.
Right.
So I've just done nothing because it hasn't quite been important enough for me to get off my whatever and do something about it. But neither has it been important enough. So that could still be in there, right?
Yeah, and involuntary churn is costly. Full stop. Like you said, you have people who are like, oh, I'm not paying for this anymore. Great. Like they didn't even notice that they, and until it's called dunning management, until the dunning system comes in to remind them of, hey, like, can you update your information or whatever the case may be, why they involuntarily churned. And they might choose right then and there to be like, yeah, I'm good. Don't really use it. I'll let it go.
Don't worry about it. Yeah. Again, like I was describing myself, not bothered either way. And obviously not bothered either way means carry on being a customer if there's no problem with that. But as soon as there's a problem and you're asking me to do something, well, we run a risk then of churn, don't we? So dunning is the process of managing this. And I guess we could say we could do it proactively or reactively, right?
Yep. There are both. You want to do the proactive as much as you can. So you see it all the time. This is where you get, 30-day notifications that your card is because sometimes your card is expiring and sometimes your subscription's up for renewal. So those are the two big reasons. 30 days out, and then the system becomes more frequent the closer you get to that if you haven't taken action. So there's that. And then once it's reactive, though, when people have actually churned, it's actually way harder to get them to come back.
Yeah.
Versus if you can do it proactively.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So again, human beings by their nature, coming back to psychology, which is so important, by our nature, less risk is involved in doing nothing as opposed to doing something. So anything that we do that is not the thing that we're already doing is more of a risk than carrying on as we are. So if carry on as we are means carry on subscribing, well, that's the less risk option. If carry on as we are, it means now carry on unsubscribed, well, then that's the less risk option. So psychologically it's a barrier, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you have to be careful with it. I mean, I have had ones where, let's say my credit card expired, I didn't know, and suddenly I get a message saying my credit card expired. There's shame involved with that for me.
Could be, couldn't
That's not a feel good email that I want to be opening up,
yeah.
right? You got to be conscious of that. So again, the more proactive, the better. But if you do find yourself that the Dunning management system hasn't been set up, and a lot of SaaS companies I found, they'll purchase whatever payment platforms they have, and they just use the default Dunning that's in there. Well,
Yes.
just like with anything, you've
Okay.
got to ask yourself, is this on brand? Is this how our customers will want to respond? And then you test it. You test and see if we change the subject line, if we change how many steps there are for them to go through, if we can do it in app versus email, like all of those things can be tested. And right there, you can make a huge dent in that involuntary churn.
Okay. Yeah, right. Which could pay for all of this process that we've been talking about many times over. Just
Yep.
on. All right. Okay. At risk. When we talk about an at-risk customer or an at-risk client, what do we mean by that, and how do we determine what the characteristics of an at-risk customer should be? How do we know what the profile of an at-risk customer is?
Wow, that's huge.
We've got 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's gigantic. That almost warrants its own discussion.
Right.
Honestly, Rick, I'm not sure that I can. Do we have enough time, or that I could do it justice?
All right. Well, let me ask you a more simple question.
Okay.
Right, is an at-risk customer is not going to be the same for everybody, right? So the point I'm trying to get to really is simply this: is just like a customer journey is different, even if we've got two companies that look like on the surface they sell the same product to the same customers. The actual customer journey is going to be different probably between those two organizations, because they have different processes, different departments, different teams doing things in a different way, and so the customer's journey is very different. Same thing here when we say about what at risk means. We've got to contextualize it to our customer, our product, and our company. And I guess that's the bit that I was really good. Not so much how we're going to do that, but just an acknowledgement of the fact that what we've got to do before we sort of start labeling things is actually create, if you like, a template profile for what we mean by at risk, some sort of scoring, some sort of model that helps us to understand what that means.
Right. And customer health score, customer health index, one of the ways to do that. Yep. But with anything that we do, it's a tool. It is not the be all and end all. Again, this is why it's so important for the CSM to have those discussions, even difficult ones, which might be, hey, everything looks great on the surface, and let's say the health score maybe isn't too bad, but maybe there's something going on, the duck with the feet below the surface. What is going on? And it's asking those questions. It's sometimes saying, hey, everything looks great, but is there something else that, because it's not necessarily being captured in the quantitative data. So you have your obvious at risk, which is, let's say, attached to a health score. And then you have your at risk where it looks like everything's good on the surface. And this can be very panicking. I can understand that if someone's listening and going, does that mean everybody who looks like they're not at risk might be at risk? And I would say to some degree, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, to some degree.
Because we don't know what we don't know, right?
Nope.
If we're not including it, we're not including it in the profile, but it might still be.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes, and you hear it where it looks like, one of their best customers doing really well, looks like successful, like everything's check. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they churn.
Yeah, because they got bought, for example.
Right. So it's having those conversations. This is why interviews become so important. And you can have your informal interviews, and then you can have formal ones, right? And formal ones are where you go through a set of questions that applies to every single customer that you interview, so you can start seeing patterns. It's very different than a CSM having a conversation, then typing in their notes afterward, because that's just that CSM's perspective. It's how they took the conversation, which is very different from asking structured questions.
Right.
And
analyzing the specific.
And analyze. Yeah. And then you can compare. And that's the biggest thing. So I always push companies when they say, oh yeah, well, our CSM, talks to the customer and they take notes and they put it in the CRM. And that's not the same as really interviewing and properly looking for these at-risk flags that, let's say, a customer health score is not capturing.
Right.
Or even behavior data, right?
Yeah.
So
it's not just what they're saying, it's also perhaps the way they're saying it.
Right.
And of course, and I, no disrespect to anybody out there, but if you remunerate and reward your customer success manager based upon, CSATs, don't be surprised if they kind of, are motivated to boost things a little bit and make things a little bit rosier than perhaps they actually were. Okay, so it's not really helping you if you're not helping them by actually, rather than motivating them with a level of CSAT, maybe motivating them by the numbers of CSATs that you get, for example, the percentage of people who actually get surveyed or get a response. And what you're looking for is real accurate data and more of it, rather than perhaps influencing people to in turn try and influence the person that they're asking the question to get a positive answer, for example.
Right. I think the term in sales is called happy ears, where
Okay, then.
Yeah, it's a confirmation bias.
I'll put you down as neutral.
Yeah. It's a confirmation bias. We all have it, and it's nothing wrong with it. But that's why, again, you have unstructured and structured.
You want optimistic salespeople.
Right. So yeah, and those happy ears can really, like you said, it sounded like everything's great and inflate everything for sure.
I like that expression. I shall remember it.
Yeah.
All right. Ears. Okay, so look, we've talked for ages. You've been very generous, but let me ask you one more question, if I may. Then is businesses change over time, right? Like anything, everything changes over time. Products change, customers change, competitive landscape changes, best practices change in churn reduction. So, do you have any thoughts on how an organization needs to manage churn, if you like, in the round, in the long term? Do they need to create a strategy? Do they need to routinely check that strategy and manage it? Do they need to have somebody who is responsible for that strategy? Do they need to be reporting on it annually, daily, monthly? Tell me a little bit about that sort of administration of churn reduction, if you like.
So I say yes to all of the above. And one of the things, and it's so true, companies tend to have well-developed, reliable, and scalable acquisition strategies. They know exactly what they're doing.
Right.
But companies don't have the same on the retention side.
Interesting.
They have a lot of retention activities that are kind of piecemeal all over the place. And I'm always arguing that you need a retention strategy so that everything fits in and it's leveraged. So it's great that you're collecting this and doing this over here and doing this over here, but it needs to be brought together, just like you have an acquisition strategy, into a retention strategy. How often do companies look at their acquisition strategies? Well, they have all the activities underneath, but they're always bringing it back to what that overarching strategy is. What's the goal that we're looking to achieve? And that it should be the same on the retention side. So that is my biggest argument. If companies want to be forward facing, like, humans have not really changed that much, even though businesses have changed and whatever else is coming at us. We've got AI now, which I personally think is an awesome addition to things.
Right.
humans fundamentally, we still don't change. We base our decisions on emotion. We are, one day we're up, one day we're down, whatever bothered us just a few minutes ago, we carry forward into what we're doing next. You got to have some sort of retention strategy to smooth those things out, our sort of humanness, if you will, just to smooth out those fluctuations, and understand that the biggest part of all of this going forward, you have to talk to your customers, not just the CSM making their notes in the CRM, formal, structured interviews, focus groups, building off of those surveys, and then looking and seeing what do we have here? What is really coming out? Because stories are going to start to come out. There's going to be narratives that you can't get from survey data, and you can't get from whatever the CSM is typing into the CRM. Like, it's vastly different, and it's bringing that strategy in, because you're making big business decisions on data that is likely very incomplete and inaccurate. And that, to me, like, I'm a huge risk taker, but that's not a risk I'd be willing to take. No, thanks. I want to know what's going on. So that is why I ask.
I think that's a fantastic spot to leave it on. Great advice. Anita Toth, thank you so much for, well, I think we've been going for about an hour now talking about this, and we could go on for much longer, I am sure, but I'd better let you get on with the rest of your day. Before we leave you, if anybody does want to perhaps get in touch with you and ask you more about your services, how can they reach you?
So 2 ways. One is my website, very creative here, anitatoth.ca. That's one way. I have actually a specific button for customer success leaders. Click on that and it will speak to your problems and your issues. And you can just go there.
Guys.
Yeah, I do. And then the other is on LinkedIn. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out, message me, and we'll get a conversation going.
Okay. So once again, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed talking to you. It's been great.
Yeah, me too. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. So for those who've been listening or watching, I hope you've enjoyed this. I think it's been a great conversation. I've certainly learned loads, and I think that we've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully you can also see that it's actually quite a complex topic, and there's more to it than meets the eye, and we could, as we said, talk for longer. If you want to learn more, speak to Anita or come and talk to me. That would be great. And of course, this is one in a very large series of podcasts that I'm doing. So if you haven't already signed up, please go to practicalcsm.com and click the membership button wherever it is, and just fill in the form. It's free. And there are quite literally hundreds of assets, articles, videos, podcasts, tools, goodness knows what. So please do avail yourself of that. And thank you very much for listening or watching. My name is Rick Adams, CEO of practicalcsm.com. Looking forward to speaking to you in future episodes. Thank you. Bye-bye.